Another thing we're doing is so far we've never used any chemicals or water to dye the materials. We just, in a way, naturally dye it by the plastic input. So
Got it.
our red party cups dye the material a really nice pink color, which was kind of a nice surprise, honestly. Um, and we've just stuck with it. We're right now as we scale, we're just not going to use any kind of dyeing. We're just going to keep it natural from the plastic input.
Welcome to Brands for a Better World, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the people and products building a more just, healthy, and regenerative future for us all. Tune in weekly, and together, we'll learn about why these better products and brands were created, how they're helping fix broken systems, and what you can do to support them. My hope is that you'll discover some new brands to love and get some sparks of inspiration that will help you live your best life. Hi, I'm your host, Gage Mitchell, founder of Modern Species, a sustainable brand design agency helping better brands grow to scale their impact. If you like this show, please help it grow by leaving ratings and reviews on your podcast app and by sharing your favorite episodes with your friends. Maybe this will be one of them. This week, we're sharing an episode of Climify we thought you might enjoy. On this episode, Eric Benson interviews Lauren Choi about her company, The New Norm, which creates clothing from recycled plastic cups.
This podcast is a project of the Climate Designers Network.
Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to another exciting episode of Climify, where we discuss the role of industry, specifically climate entrepreneurship, in tackling issues around climate. Industry and manufacturing account for 23% of U.S. climate greenhouse gas emissions. It's the third largest emitter, so it's clear industry has a big responsibility to be doing better. Lauren Choi is a climate entrepreneur. She helped start a fabric and fashion company called The New Norm, for she believes industry can do better, and her passion for climate action and sustainability could be achieved as a founder. Like me, she was inspired by circular design, as defined in the book Cradle to Cradle, where biological or technical nutrients should be the basis for how things are made. Lauren is focused on the idea of a technical nutrient. In this case, those red plastic party cups that we see everywhere after college parties or sporting events, littering the ground and overwhelming our garbage cans. I've always found this to be obviously disgusting, and wondered how we could change our own behaviors to not focus on using single-use objects. Lauren admits her company is not the silver bullet answer when it comes to mitigating the fast fashion impact on our climate, but it's a fantastic way to continue our progress toward a circular economy. I'm inspired by Lauren and her determination to do good in this world, and I hope you are too.
Hi, my name is Lauren Choi, and I am the founder of The New Norm. We are a startup recycling plastics into sustainable yarns and fabrics, and we specifically target plastics that are not commonly recycled. So our signature material is made from the iconic red party cup that you see at just about any social event. And we've been working on this for the last 4 or 5 years now. And you can learn a little bit more about what we do on our website, which is called thenewnormfabric.com. And we're also on Instagram. It's at The New Norm Fabric. And we also recently just launched on TikTok, which has been fun. So for the past 2 weeks, we've been posting more videos about kind of behind the scenes, how we do what we do. And that is also at The New Norm Fabric. So yeah, feel free to check it out.
Well, Lauren, welcome to Climify. Excited that you are here. You have some amazing projects going on, and I can't wait to talk about them.
Yeah, really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. It's fun to do these conversations, especially since I wasn't aware of you before this, and finding out more about you has been just really exciting to see someone doing good work like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the big thing that you're doing, which you talked about in your introduction, was The New Norm.
Mm-hmm.
And Can you walk us through how that started? How did you start the new norm, and why did you start it? I think you started it when you were an engineering undergraduate student. Is that right? At Johns Hopkins?
Yeah.
And can you talk more about that and how it all came to be?
Sure. I'll start at the beginning. Yes, I was studying materials engineering at Johns Hopkins at the time. I went into college really passionate about sustainability, but didn't really know what that entailed and how I could pursue it. And materials engineering seemed to be a field where so much innovation was happening across so many different industries. And so that's what really excited me about that field. Um, but when it came down to founding the new norm, a couple things were happening in the world that kind of led to me wanting to pursue this specific problem. Um, One thing at the time, I was working at a swimwear brand, which for a lot of students studying materials engineering, that's not typically what they're doing
Yeah,
on the
no.
side. Um, but yeah, it was like an LA-based brand, direct to consumer, on Instagram with a website. So yeah, I got to see that whole, the whole design process, sourcing, manufacturing. They were producing everything in the LA garment district. Um, so yeah, a bit unusual, but I always recommend, doing something a little outside of your studies or your field to
Yeah,
kind of,
weird is good. I like being weird. So
yeah. So that was happening. But in the world, kind of two big things were coming to light. One, in 2018, the national sword policy came into place, and really brought to light that the US lacked domestic recycling infrastructure. We relied heavily on shipping our waste overseas, mainly to China.
right.
Uh, and that is a time when a lot of, news articles were coming out about, wait a minute, we don't have domestic recycling solutions. Um, when that policy came into place, China essentially stopped accepting our recyclables. And then our landfills and our waste management system was really overwhelmed. Um, and someone who recycled like crazy, I was shocked because I was like, I assumed every time I put something in the blue bin, it was being turned into something else. And that
Yeah.
is unfortunately rarely the case. Um, the other thing happening at the same time is also a lot of media coverage on the fashion industry and how polluting it is. And I think a lot of people have heard this line now of fashion is the second largest polluting industry after oil and gas. That
Wow.
really was the headline for that entire year when it came to fashion. Um, and so those kind of all of those things happening led me to start doing some research on, wait a minute,
Mhm.
how can we recycle? How can we solve a problem at the intersection of a couple different industries and a couple different problems happening all at the same time? And I probably around a year later spent a summer building an extruder in my garage.
An extruder.
Yes.
Tell us
Uh,
about what an extruder is for some of us who do.
yeah. Yeah. What I was creating was like a small machine. It took plastic as an input and then recycled it into a filament for yarn. Um, those are kind of the basic steps. I had never built a machine before.
But you're an engineer, so it must have been easy.
Oh, no. It it was probably one of the most difficult things I did at the time, just because, yeah, I had never built anything before. Um, was really lucky to, rely on a lot of YouTube videos and textbooks and articles and things like that, but pretty much figured it out from scratch. Everything from the wiring to the spooling mechanism to like, how do you cut metal and weld it together? Very basic steps that I had never done
Yeah.
before. But the machine did not work for that entire summer.
Oh, no.
Yeah. pretty much charred the inside of it. It was completely burnt, did not work. Um, so at the end of that summer, I took it back to school with me. And at Hopkins, we had a maker space, a metal shop. And so I assembled a team of mechanical engineers, a couple environmental engineers, and we started putting the machine back together, the pieces that I had completely burnt. And the party cup aspect of what we do, that's kind of the unique thing. So over 7 billion red party cups are used annually. And
Wow.
those are one of those plastics that just don't get recycled here in the US. Um, and so being back on a college campus, you're surrounded by party cups
Yeah.
in just like about any social setting. So
Even as a professor, I see them every
yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah, they're everywhere. So yeah, that's what inspired that idea. And once I had kind of put the machine back together, we put a party cup into it, and it processed very well. And that is what started, this. It's been like 4 or 5 years now. It's kind of what kicked off this entire journey. So yeah.
Well, that was super smart because you had something right around you that you see on a
Yes.
daily basis, and it's
Mhm.
not going back into the system like it
Mhm.
should. So you found
Yeah.
a way to do it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think college, that setting is such a good place to test out things. It's, its own little ecosystem. You have, um, so many people using this material, and we ended up running a pilot collection program to kind of just test out, hey, does this work? Can we get enough of this material? Are people using as much as we think they are? Um, and so we went to a bunch of student organizations and we were like, hey, we're going to give you a giant red trash can that
That
looks
makes
like a
sense.
big
Red cup,
red
red trash.
party cup.
Yeah.
Yep. And, after the weekend, we're going to come pick up your old cups. Um, Adoption was really slow
I can
initially.
imagine. Yeah.
Um, And, the hypothesis was like, wait, we are not collecting all of the cups. And so we started posting the stats on social media of the different organizations that had signed on to this collection program. And all of a sudden, people were like reaching out and saying, who's running our organization's,
Oh,
collection
wow.
program? Like, maybe I should step up into this position. Or like, wait a minute, I think we're using way more. Like, let me make sure everybody knows about this. And it kind of spread by word of mouth. And then all of a sudden we were collecting thousands of cups
Wow.
every month. And Hopkins is a campus of 4,000 or 5,000 undergrad. And
Mhm.
so the fact that, from, the 5 or 6 clubs we had onboarded, we were getting, 5,000 cups a month.
Jeez.
It just really goes to show how many party cups are being used, even in a small test environment. So,
Yeah. Well, that makes me feel good that people in that age group
mhm,
saw that online and reacted positively to it
yeah.
as like, wow, no, maybe it wasn't shame, but it was like, we know better. Let's do this.
Mhm.
Then it makes me feel bad that there's so many cups being.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we've all experienced that. Oh, like, let me put, a drink inside of a cup. Oh, I place it on a table. I don't know where it went because they all
Yeah.
look the same. And then I get another cup, and I it's the epitome of that, like, single-use plastic. Like, you are
Mhm.
really only using it once, and
Yeah.
sometimes even forgetting.
You picked the right thing because I feel like it's all over the yards here after parties.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but you were using at Johns Hopkins when you got the new norm project idea, you were in part of an accelerator,
Yeah.
business accelerator. Um, was it called Fast Forward U? Was that the name of
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
So what's
Um,
that all about? How did that help you?
yeah, so I didn't know what an accelerator was. until I found Fast Forward. It's actually at Hopkins, when I joined the program, it had only been like 2 or 3 years old. I think some other colleges and universities have more established programs, but yeah, no, Fast Forward in the last, few years now has grown into a great accelerator program that's open to undergrads, grad students. I think even faculty can,
Yeah.
participate. And I mean, there are so many different accelerators, is what I've learned over the years. But the kind of general concept is if you have a business idea, a program will help you develop a business model. I knew nothing. I wasn't studying business in school. I didn't know how to create a pitch deck or write a grant application, or, there are actually all of these business plan competitions. For college and university students. So it was just an area I knew nothing about.
Hmm.
Um, and so when I went to them and kind of told them about this idea, they provided so many resources, um, not only kind of help with the business side of things, but they also had a maker space, and that's where I ended up housing the machine in the back corner. They were very generous to let me just let it there for 2 whole years. uh,
The burnt out machine that you.
yeah, brought it, fixed it up, and it lived in the corner there for probably a couple years. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that my university has a number of accelerators, I think two,
Hmm.
and a maker space, many maker spaces, probably too many potentially. But I'm wondering about, in your perspective, as you were going through your engineering curriculum there at Johns Hopkins, how do you think maybe an accelerator could be built into a degree program, especially with the idea that you had? I could imagine other students feeling like, oh gosh, I feel like I have something here.
Yeah. I've thought about this a bit because, so I think depending on the major, at least I can only speak for Johns Hopkins, but there were some majors with really great design team programs. And at Hopkins, what that meant was, you form a team of students. Sometimes there's, a faculty lead who's like a mentor or an advisor. Um, and it's very hands on. You're solving a problem, you're identifying it, figuring out what your solution is. Sometimes it's about building like a physical product or a device. And there were other majors that had that kind of program built in to the degree. Materials engineering just didn't have that strong of a presence. And I think having a design team or a kind of design program is very important in that it's hands on. Like, this was the first time it wasn't theoretical anymore. It wasn't like, oh, I'm studying, looking at, slides that a teacher is presenting and then, taking notes and studying my notes. This was the first time I got to build something with my hands. And as you do that, you realize, oh my God, there are so many more problems that I never would have thought of.
Yeah,
And you
once you
don't
get down
always,
to it.
yeah, yeah. And you don't always get that when you're, writing an essay or taking an exam. So I think it's important to have that kind of hands-on component.
Well, you are working in multiple different intersections here with the new norm. You're in this technology and engineering discipline. You're in circular design. You're into climate and fashion. How do you give all of those some sort of equal attention, or do you not give them that there at the new norm?
Yeah, it's a lot of moving parts. Like, I think each step of our process is, as you mentioned, kind of a different industry altogether,
It
because
is, yeah.
we have plastics, that's the plastics industry. We are recycling those plastics. Those are actually totally different. Like, the recycling folks and the plastics folks, you would think they're more, more similar, but there isn't always a ton of overlap there.
Mm.
And so recycling is a whole separate thing. Then we have, fibers, creating yarns. Those are different, manufacturers. And and players in that space. And then you have fabric people who are, as much as yarn and fabric overlap, those are also separate
Yeah.
entities. And then you have, the ultimate like end user, which could be fashion. I think a lot of people also forget textiles go into a whole lot of other industries as well. So you have automotive, you have
Yeah.
upholstery,
I
home
was going to say
furnishing.
cars. Perfect.
Yeah, pretty much everything we touch, sit on, wear is made out of some kind of textile. And it's sometimes hard to back up and be like, oh wow, we use textiles for so many different end uses. Uh,
Have you thought about, I'm thinking about right now when you said cars,
mhm.
the EVs that are going to be hitting the roads more and more
Yeah.
here in the US. And there's been some critiques about those. And I'm wondering if you've thought about from the new norm perspective of getting involved from a fabric perspective with the cars.
Yeah, I think we're, as we are scaling production, definitely thinking about, okay, we don't want to ever limit to just fashion. I think fashion has that more glamorous, appeal to it. But yeah, I mean, automotive is huge. Um, I think what's unfortunate is I think the general consensus is that automotive is tough to break into. There are so many specifications. I think there's not a lot of fast development and movement. Fashion is pretty, surprisingly slow in terms of adopting new technology, but there is a very public push right now for fashion to change
Mhm.
its ways that I don't think other end products are getting as much attention. Like people aren't passionate about sofas and mattresses being made from, more sustainable materials, but
Yeah.
they want a jacket that's made from, something cool. So it's something we're thinking about and kind of trying to be more and more aware of. But yeah, I think we're focusing on kind of scaling our capabilities so that if we are to work with a larger whoever it is, we'd be able to actually provide material. Um, but yeah, going back to your original question, I think we need to give each of those things equal focus
Mhm.
in some ways. I think it's really important to think about the end user, which in our case is someone who's going to be sewing a garment and designing something that's going to be worn by a person.
Right.
Um, you need a material that's going to feel good. And, do you need stretch? Do you need it to drape a certain way? So I think it's important to design ultimately for that. But at the same time, we have to design for circularity. We're doing a lot of things or considering a lot of things that are going into the product even before it gets to that finished fabric. And so, for example, we are using recycled materials. We are currently only manufacturing in the US. We have a very local supply chain, which eliminates the carbon emissions
Yeah.
associated with shipping
That's smart.
overseas and transportation, which um, not to go off on a tangent, but BBC recently tracked the journey of like a Zara shirt. And
No, it must be terrible.
it traveled over 10,000 miles before getting to the store.
Good
Um,
Lord.
so country to country for creating the fibers, dyeing the fabric, cutting the garment, each step was in a different country.
Yeah.
Um, so right now we're trying to keep it as local as possible. We do all of our production in the US. Um, we are sticking to filament yarns, and microfiber shedding is a really big hot topic right
Yeah, I'm
now.
glad you brought that up because I was
Yeah.
wondering about that.
Yeah. I mean, it is not the final solution, but filament yarns, there are kind of two major groupings of yarns. You have filament yarns and then you have spun yarns. So even the t-shirt we're both wearing right now, if you see those tiny
Yes.
little fibers coming off of it,
Mhm.
that's a spun yarn. So that means all these little fibers are being spun together. Those fly off in the laundry machine very easily.
Yes.
Um, filament yarns don't shed as much. That is just been researched and studied. There are certain brands now trying to push only filament yarns. But we as users of clothing love that soft feel. We want stretch. We want it to be cozy and squishy. And I think that is where filament yarns are a little limited. They don't give those properties. And so do we want comfort or do we want, less shedding? I think is going to be,
Right.
it's a big debate.
I do own a shirt that's made out of recycled PET, like water bottles, and it's very soft. So I'm guessing it's not filament then, based on your description.
Well, a lot of clothing isn't. I mean, it's not, the only test you can do, but really if you look at your clothing and you can see kind of any little fibers, yeah.
Mine's probably cotton. I think this is cotton. So
Cotton is a spun yarn. Yeah.
okay. So still something comes off.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's both natural and synthetic. It's both that shed. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether it's up to the big brands to start, solving those issues. Is it up to users to install filters in our laundry machines?
Yeah, because that's something we can do.
Right. Yeah.
Isn't yoga pants? I've been reading about
Hmm.
microplastics that have gotten into our water supply from washing garments. And I read that yoga pants are one of the biggest contributors to that. Didn't know if that was true, but I'm sure that'd make a lot of people unhappy if they did hear that because they're so
Yeah.
comfortable, right?
That's the thing is like, I think comfort comes from, as I was kind of mentioning, like the really soft, the really stretchy, like people love a nice fluffy blanket or, a nice, fuzzy jacket. And
Oh
it's
yeah, of course.
things that shed the most. So, yeah, it's a tough problem.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
you're doing good work to start to solve it. So definitely
Yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah, and I'll say again, it is not the solution, but
No.
it is one way to mitigate. Um, Another thing we're doing is so far we've never used any chemicals or water to dye the materials. We just, in a way, naturally dye it by the plastic input. So
Got it.
our red party cups dye the material a really nice pink color, which was kind of a nice surprise, honestly. And we've just stuck with it. We're right now as we scale, we're just not going to use any kind of dyeing. We're just going to keep it natural from the plastic input. Yeah.
Well, you've been talking here just now about the things that you've been learning by running your company, The New Norm. And as this podcast is about climate design education, I'm wondering, in your engineering education at Johns Hopkins, did the topic of climate change come up? Did they talk about sustainability in materials? How has that helped you at the accelerator and then in your company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the degree gave me a great foundation of just like, materials engineering, materials science. I feel like that foundation has allowed me to do what I'm doing. I think I self-selected into a lot of sustainability courses, and I think those were offered at school, which was great. Like I took a renewable energy engineering course and a course on recycling, not just plastics, but metal, glass, other types of materials as well. There was, a sustainable design class. And so I think more and more those are being offered, which is
That's good to
great.
hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need it.
Yeah. And it makes you think in a different way. A lot of times I think these courses are mixed in with more of a global lens or developing outside of the US lens. And I think that's also very helpful to think about what are some of the problems we're facing globally, not just specifically here at home. But yeah, I think the accelerator So after Hopkins, a few years later, I participated in the Halcyon Accelerator. And
Yeah, you've been in a couple now, haven't you?
I've been at a couple, I guess.
That's a good thing. It means that, people like what you're doing and they want to support it.
It's been very helpful validation. And I do think, without that kind of like, okay, yes, like we validate what you're working on, like to me, that was also momentum to keep going. And
Hmm.
with Halcyon, they are specifically though only for impact driven ventures, social impact, environmental impact. And I think being around other startups that were, had that impact driven model built into what they were doing and, getting training and kind of advice on how to build an impact driven model was very helpful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Seemingly, because you're still going at it and you're doing good work.
Yeah, yeah, still working on it.
Well, I'm thinking here from an educator perspective. Doesn't have to be
Mhm.
design, but educator perspective. And I'm seeing maybe just theoretically here, I'm seeing a student doing very interesting work on a project I assigned. I have done assignments in the past where I've said, let's start a B corporation.
Mhm.
And you're going to be branding it, coming up with the mission and vision and what you're producing. What advice would you give to maybe an educator who sees a student like you with a great idea that should live outside of the classroom?
Mhm.
Are accelerators the best thing for them, or what do you suggest we do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think accelerators are one helpful tool. Like for me, getting access to all of those resources that I didn't even know existed, was what allowed me to take this further and outside of the university sphere. Um, I mean, I can't deny that grant funding really helped with that initial transition. And I guess, I could not have found those resources without an accelerator program.
Yeah,
To date, the new norm has been all grant funded. It's all of the product development and R&D that we do would not be possible without grant funding. And so, uh,
congratulations. That's great.
thank you. Yeah, no, it's been um, like very, very helpful along the way, because a lot of this kind of initial testing and these lab trials are very costly. And as a student, there's just almost no way that an
Yeah.
individual be able to
No,
do
yeah.
that. Yeah. So I remember graduating and being like, okay, if we're able to, get certain grants, then I can do formal product development. Without it, there's just no way I could have, no way I could have done that.
Good luck. Yeah.
Um, and then I think one thing I found more and more helpful each year is just talking to folks in industry that have decades more experience than I.
Did that happen through the classes and accelerator or on your own?
I would say a mix of both. I think the accelerator connected me to a lot of great, alums who had started startups or who had been kind of working in different industries. But I do think that over the years, it has always gone this way where you meet one person and they say, "Oh, I think you should talk to this other person." And you talk to that person and they're like, "Oh, wait a minute. Let me connect you to this person." And I think that's very valuable, because you just get a way more full picture of, oh, these are all the different things that people are working on and everything that goes into solving a problem. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, what kind of advice do you have for maybe the student now, or maybe anyone who's thinking about being a climate entrepreneur?
Mm,
Um, obviously they
yeah.
can start that in college like you did, but what happens after?
Yeah, what happens after? And oh my God, I could answer this question for like a straight hour. I've thought about this a
We'll
lot.
try to cap it at a few minutes. How about that?
Yes, yeah. Um, I think there are so many ways you can pursue a startup. And I think that's one thing I didn't know as a student. I don't know where this mentality came from, but this like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm all in. And I think you need that mentality. But I think that we live in a world now that is so flexible. There's so many resources that, I wish someone told me when I was graduating, like, hey, it's okay to, as a student, take a step back and kind of, you don't have to do everything right now in the moment.
Yeah.
Or I've met so many founders now over the years that, worked a full-time job and had their idea on the side and were like, okay, I'm just going to keep tinkering with this until I feel comfortable to make that leap. Because I will say the startup lifestyle comes with immense risk. It is not glamorous. The day-to-day is a lot of problem solving. It's not all about raising money and having investors and scaling quickly. And sure, that is for some people. I just think now with TV and movies, that's been blown out of proportion.
Like
when
the Shark Tank. I feel like your life is like the Shark Tank.
Yeah, but
It's not.
it's not. And I've actually now met a bunch of people that have gone on Shark Tank, and that behind the scenes is so
Oh
fascinating.
my gosh.
It is, once again, not what you see on TV. The behind the scenes comes with way more uncertainty. Are they going to air the show or not? If they say they're going to invest, are they actually going to invest?
Right. Yeah. There's
Is it going to
contracts
fall
and
through?
stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, I would just say, it is not, it is, it comes, with a lot of risk and a lot of uncertainty. And I think there are ways to do it that are not, that kind of, glamorous TV version of it. But yeah, I would say also, like, if you're a student considering it, I think while you're a student, that's the best time to try something. You have so many resources. I think part of it, though, is searching for those resources.
Yeah.
They would not have naturally just come to me. I didn't even know about them. I think it's a lot about asking questions and kind of doing some digging and meeting new people.
You have to really care about what you're doing for you to
Yeah,
have to spend all that time.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
big lesson for someone who wants to do this too, right? It's not going to be
Yeah.
handed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of kind of like pushing it forward yourself.
We'll take a quick commercial break here and then get back to the conversation.
Where do young designers see themselves at the intersection of climate change and innovation, and how can we teach that intersection in the classroom? Designers are problem solvers, capable of imagining solutions for a more sustainable future. My name is Rachel Cifarelli, and I'm part of the Climate Designers New Wave team. In the past few years, New Wave has released 2 reports exploring students' experiences of climate design education, or lack thereof, and what they hope to see in their classes. Now we want you, design educators, to use this research in your classrooms. And this summer, we're giving educators a chance to talk to the New Wave team directly. Twice a month, the New Wave researchers will be available to walk you through our findings, answer any questions you have, and help you implement actionable project briefs directly into your classroom. We'll also show you how to use our media kit to easily share the research with your students and how they can sign up to be a participant. Head to climatedesigners.org/edu/newwave to sign up for a call with the New Wave team. Help us inform a new wave of design education, one that teaches every designer how to be a climate designer.
Do you feel, you're a climate entrepreneur and there are other climate startups happening, which is really,
Yeah.
really promising. Do you feel like you have a greater, how should I put this? Do you feel like you have a responsibility to educate consumers and suppliers, manufacturers, everything in that supply chain to be progressive towards a more environmentally sustainable business model, kind of teach those people involved in making your product about sustainability and climate? Do you feel like you have that responsibility or
Yeah,
not so much?
definitely. No, in a way, yes, because kind of going back to those, like 4 or 5 separate industries that we're hoping to touch, like there is ultimately, when you get down to like talking to these manufacturers or the people on the ground, there is a fairly large awareness gap.
Mhm.
And that's kind of why I say textiles, recycling, fashion move very slow at the end of the day. I mean, these like when it comes to textiles and fashion, like these industries have been around for, hundreds and thousands of years now. These are very old industries. Um, and as much as, fashion seems to quickly change, I think the big players are pretty stuck in their ways and are now trying to get the gears moving.
Right.
But because of that, like, for example, like when I went to our bigger yarn manufacturer for the first time, like they do not currently run any kind of recycled material, any kind of sustainable material. And they create, 100 million pounds of yarn every year. And that's on the small scale.
That's
Um,
cringeworthy right there.
yeah. And I think it took like a whole year to convince them to run our trial. And, it worked and that was great. And I think now there's a bit more excitement to do this kind
That's
of work.
good. Yeah.
But it took a long time to, get to know them and ultimately convince them, hey, like, please run our recycled material so we can create yarn out of it. Um, so yeah, there is some, groundwork to be done with the folks we work with one on one. When it comes to the consumer, that is such a big, you know,
I bet.
gang. I think that is up to everybody touching the consumer. Like the brands, I mean, are trying to do a lot more marketing. And I think there's been already backlash as to like, oh, this is greenwashing. Like this is, not actually, saying or doing what it's saying it's doing. And
Right.
um, I think what we can do and what we've, started trying to do in a small way is show our process. So as I mentioned, the whole, we launched on TikTok 2 weeks ago.
I'll have to
Little things.
follow that.
Yeah, that it was, we got a lot of views and a lot of followers very quickly, and we didn't expect that kind of traction. So that's been a fun development.
Kudos to you. Yeah, that's great.
Um, but yeah, our goal with that is just like, hey, this is how we do what we do, and this is kind of the behind the scenes, um, so that we can be transparent.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're transparent about it. And I think the power of what you're doing, because you mentioned this value action gap. So
Mhm.
you can educate someone about something, but then there's this gap leading to action. Doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean if they know about it, they're going to do
Mhm.
something. But when you're showing your suppliers that it can
Yeah.
be done and they see it because they do it, I think that's powerful. And then
Mhm.
that's where I think that real
Yeah.
change can
Yeah.
happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
You also mentioned greenwashing, so I wanted to ask you about that. So there's a lot of stuff out there that is greenwashing, right? We've seen it. So there's call for anti-greenwashing guides in the
Mhm.
textile reuse and recycling industry, and I'm wondering there as an entrepreneur where that's happening, what is your firsthand experience and some of the things that are happening in that world of greenwashing? And do you think that the circular design products offer effective solutions to combat that
Mhm.
misinformation?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're pretty small scale still, so we haven't worked with, the big brands that are running these large marketing campaigns. Going back to like grant funding and things like that, our scaling has been pretty organic, and maybe slower, but I think we've gotten a lot more technical validation than other people in the space. So our goal is to get to a point where people can then, kind of plug and play with our materials instead of having to develop them further. But going back to your original question, I think, yeah, I've met a lot of folks who have scaled their solution and have hit those moments of, yeah, oh my God, wait, a brand wants to say this about my material when it's not actually made out of that, or it doesn't actually do this. And I think part of it is going back to that awareness gap. Sometimes the brand and the marketing team might just not know, oh, this is actually what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's going to take a lot of collaboration. I think it's unfortunate when it's completely false.
Mm.
But I think in what I've seen, um, sometimes it's, they say it's made out of this material when in reality it's not, and it's made out of something else. And I think it's going to take some collaboration to kind of get to a point where it's like, okay, this is, truly what's going on. We're being transparent. Um,
Well, I wonder with like
mhm,
pushback from consumers, and if
mhm,
I'm thinking about like the organic food movement, that
mhm,
was fairly successful, I would say, and that had to do with a lot of consumer pushback. Are
mhm.
you feeling that at all in the fashion industry and it's growing?
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I think consumers are causing the movement entirely. Without that kind of consumer pushback, the fashion industry would not be transforming the way that it currently is transforming. Uh,
Hmm.
I think, things like social media, certain platforms existing, that's a really big part of, you know, the younger generations are saying, "Hey, we want this." And brands are like, "Okay, here we go. Now we're gonna finally get things moving along." So, um, I still
Last second, right? They're like, oh, we got to do it now.
yeah, I think though that's gonna take a while.
I agree.
And that's something definitely I've seen as a startup is, yeah, the last minute, like, "Oh, okay, now we're gonna do this." There's also a gap there with, okay, there are a bunch of these sustainable technologies starting to scale, starting to get attention and funding. A lot of these solutions are not at scale, but
No,
the brand wants it at scale now. And so that's another thing where I think there's at least a decade long roadmap ahead of brand plus startup working together to scale a technology, and understanding where the technology is at. Um, we can create today, hundreds and thousands of pounds of, we can recycle plastic into a fabric. We would need a lot of help if we were to scale that to 100,000 pounds.
right.
And if we still wanted to, be cost effective in the brand's point of view. So it's going to take some work from both sides.
Well, I agree with you, and I don't know if you know this, but I do some material science engineering myself, and I have a sustainable paper
Mhm,
uh,
mhm,
organization. I don't want to call it a business,
mhm,
but I have been approached by in the past two very large beauty brands saying we want your corn based paper
mhm,
packaging in
mhm,
our product packaging.
mhm.
Would you be interested? Right. And
Yeah,
thinking, of course, this is the whole point, right? We want to
yeah,
scale these things up like you're doing at the new norm. But they wanted it yesterday, right? Like, okay, cool.
yeah,
We need about 100,000 boxes made in,
yeah.
like, I could make you one to see if it works, but
Yeah,
I'm not at that scale.
it's
I feel that
yeah,
pain.
it's tough. And yeah, it's sad if that's like the one opportunity and it passes. And I
It
think
did pass. It did pass.
it shouldn't be that way though. It
I
should
know.
be an environment where it's like, okay, let's start at one, but let's get to 100 and let's get to 1,000. And I think that kind of collaboration is important going forward.
Yeah, I tried the idea of like inserts, like I can do
Hmm.
these. That would be okay to talk about their commitment, but
Hmm.
no,
Hmm.
didn't
Yeah,
quite work out,
it's tough.
unfortunately.
It's tough.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I asked you a question just a
Hmm.
minute ago, and it just
Yeah.
popped in my head again.
Yeah.
I should respond to this question, and that is, I was asking how if you felt a responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
I towards educating the supply
Mm-hmm.
chain. I think it's also the responsibility of people like me and the listeners in the design education area to be continually, because we are involved in manufacturing, we make things, and I feel like there's a responsibility there by the academic institutions to further this farther. So it's not just like, hey guys, good luck and your
Hmm.
climate entrepreneurship. Not enough people really know about what you're doing. So to good luck. So I don't think that's the best way forward. So I do feel like I personally have a responsibility to help people like you.
Yeah. And I guess two thoughts on that. Like, one, I've actually met a lot of fashion and design students who keep saying, oh, I wish I knew more about materials. Like, I don't know how they're
Yeah.
actually made, or I wish I could design, certain things myself, but I just was never taught. And I think that's where, yeah, educators are a really important, part of inspiring new types of thinking, and even just showing like, hey, like exposing students to like, this is what's going on. This is how you can approach certain things. Um, the flip side, and this is something I've also thought about a lot, like I students are in a really interesting um time in life where you've been a student, you're kind of jumping into quote the real adult world.
Yeah. We call it the big world here at
Yeah.
the big
Yeah.
world.
The big world. Um, and I think student entrepreneurship is really unique in that you don't have any industry experience, but at the same time, you might have the most freedom and flexibility in your life to pursue a more risky path or a different idea. And I think that jump is where, if a student entrepreneur is going to pursue something, that's when the most support is needed.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
Hopkins recently launched an award, which is the biggest grant they've done to date. This is the first year they're running it. And when I saw the post, I was like, oh, this is so great, because it's something I really would have wanted as a student, but it is a significant grant. It also pays the founder, which is, a
Oh,
hot
that's,
topic,
oh,
you pay
yeah.
yourself or not. That
Yeah.
is,
Unique.
I've, definitely gone a few years with not paying myself and doing, other things instead. And so it's, yeah, that leap is huge as a
Mhm.
student. And I think it's good that, hopefully people are now, setting up the right resources to be able to make that leap if it's a startup that the student is seriously interested in pursuing. But yeah, I mean, I think a grant is great, but I'm sure there are so many other ways to support a student founder. So yeah, no, that made me excited, and I saw that the other day, and I was like, oh, this is
Yeah. You wish you were still there maybe to get.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I've asked my students, I teach a graphic in the graphic design program here at University of Illinois. And I asked them like, where does paper come from?
Mm-hmm.
And it's shocking. I guess it was shocking to me. Like we basically got down to like, they knew it was from trees, right? But what part of the world does it come from?
Mm,
And just a lack of understanding about it. But
yeah.
that's our job as educators to help them get
Mm,
there. And I'm wondering what toolkits or resources can you recommend about materials
mm,
that we could go to,
hmm.
that you use?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Oh, I don't think I have a great answer for this one, because unfortunately, I don't think there's a central place to find all of
Mm.
the
Yeah, I don't
information.
think so.
Um, this might be a slightly different answer to your question. But I do think that podcasts like this one have been a great resource to
Ah,
me. Um, I mean, I think a lot of people listened to this one, but How I Built This, like,
how I built
give,
this.
yeah,
I've
like
heard of
there
that
are
one.
some podcasts out there that really dive into some of these topics and like people's personal experiences and what problems they faced and how they overcame them. That to me is a huge resource, because you're getting to hear someone's actual story.
Yeah.
Uh, and that, I mean, personally, that's been very helpful to me, in kind of expanding my understanding of certain things, or learning more. So, but yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that one about a specific
You're more
toolkit.
than welcome to, because
Yeah.
it's a big thing that I think can help overcome, I think, some of the problems that currently exist. And that is the educators, even that you had at Johns Hopkins, they are supposed to, these are the course objectives, right?
Hmm.
And it'd be great to expand those to include climate.
Hmm.
Some of them don't have the knowledge,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
these resources could maybe be that bridge And
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
Hopefully Climify can be helpful to
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
couple of
Just
people,
like this one.
maybe
Yeah.
one person.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
to get back to the new norm because this is
Okay. Yeah.
a project that is consuming your life and
Mhm.
passionate about it. So you talked about transparency earlier, and I'm interested in how you prioritize that in terms of you kind of alluded to this, that you provide information to
Mhm.
everyone involved, like the measurements, the evaluations of your maybe carbon footprint, climate action that you're working on. Can you talk more about these impact metrics that you care about and how you're doing them?
Yeah. I think the way I've always thought about the impact of a product or a process is that it's a lot easier to design it up front in a certain way than try to work backwards. Um, and I think that may be an issue that some of the larger players are facing is that their process or their product was not designed for circularity. And then
Right.
having to work backwards takes a long time and you have to go through levels of approval and whatnot. And so kind of the things I was mentioning earlier, the the material sourcing, the way in which we're creating the product, where we're creating the product, our supply chain. I think these are things we can control as a startup that's very small
Yeah.
and nimble. And to me, that's where we can control our impact and the metrics we're looking at. Um, but at the same time, like we're not a huge company. We don't have the resources to bring in an outside consulting firm to do a whole life cycle analysis on
Yeah.
our
Those are
process.
expensive and take
Y-
time.
Yeah, and it's not, something we have access to. So, yeah, I think for us we can control our product and how it's made. And I think that's where I've been pretty strict with this is exactly what we're doing and we're not really straying from
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I used a platform called Sustainable Minds
Okay.
to
Yeah.
do. I think it's like they give you some sort of monthly fee, but it seemed. I mean, I could afford it, so it's not.
Okay,
It's
yeah, I'll take a look.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's actually someone I know. So
Okay.
pushing my network, right?
Awesome.
That might
Yeah.
be something that's pretty helpful for you.
Great. Okay.
And I'm wondering, in the same breath here, are there other companies that don't have to be in fashion, but are in fashion if you want, that are doing the work that you're striving for?
Mhm. There are a lot of startups in this space that are getting, picking up speed and getting a lot of traction right now. I would say, um, in my mind, there are like 25, 30 startups at that kind of Series A or B range and are, building out their pilot facilities or, doing some pretty cool brand collaborations. And in my mind, I'd like to think we're all in the same boat where
Yeah.
none of the technologies are exactly the same. And when I say that, I'm thinking of the folks doing like chemical recycling. Like we're doing a mechanical recycling process. There are folks doing chemical recycling or looking at alternative biomaterials and, doing just some really cool stuff in the material textile intersection. And yeah, no, it's super cool to meet those teams and hear what they're doing. And a lot of us are facing the same struggles. And so yeah, it's been really interesting to meet these people over the past, couple years. Yeah.
Well, as this season is all about women in
Mhm.
climate
Yeah.
action, when you mentioned struggles there, I'm wondering, are there any barriers that you faced as a female entrepreneur in this space? And do you have any advice for other women in particular who are hoping to emulate
Yeah.
what you're doing?
I feel actually very grateful at how much support I've gotten through this process. But I will say, being a young founder comes with its challenges.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's another thing that's not as commonly talked about. A lot of founders are decades into their career and have done something very well for a long time and decide to spin out on their own. I was at a conference this time last year, and it was a bunch of different startups, probably, like 20, 30 startups were there. And I was by far the youngest founder. And it was very noticeable. I mean, most of the folks were probably my parents' age.
Oh, no.
And I think when you take a step out of a university business plan competition where everyone's a student founder, the reality is once you leave that environment, most founders are, a bit older and have more credibility, experience. They've done this before. They have way more connections. And I think that's one thing that's been a challenge. But that's where I think, being younger and hopefully, as a small startup, more nimble and fast on your feet, I think, focusing on building strong relationships, meeting new people, really getting to know the people you work with. I feel like I know my manufacturers very well. I've, taken the time to meet people in person. I think that's important to make up for the maybe lack of, I worked with this person for the last 10 years and I know them super well. And when I build my startup, I can just, tap into their, system or their company so yeah, I think it's been more of a challenge being younger. But yeah, I think overall I have to be very grateful for how much support I've gotten along the way.
Well, that's good to hear. I mean, I feel like you and the other startups you mentioned and your area was used 25 to 30 or something. That's exciting to hear. And also just speaking from being a little older, that age was one where you could take a lot of risks, right? Because you didn't have the home, the mortgage to say, oh shit.
Yeah.
Maybe not an extended family yet. And so you could take all these risks so I think that's maybe I was to flip the script a little bit.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. No, I definitely can do that now because of, the lack of those kind of big responsibilities.
Part of me wishes to be back there.
Yeah.
I don't want these responsibilities. I want to. Well, I'm wondering what's next for you. What's going on with the new norm going forward? This season is connected to the Project Drawdown roadmap. Do you use that? Do you not use that? What's the next steps for you?
Yeah. We actually have a really exciting update. And unfortunately, I can't share exactly who yet.
Breaking news.
Breaking news. So we've finalized an exciting partnership in a way with a really large plastics manufacturer.
Oh, awesome.
And they are one of the largest manufacturers of these party cups and took an interest in our
Now
work.
I know who they are, but I won't say.
Well, actually, it was surprising. It's not who most people guess initially.
Okay, then I'm wrong.
So those are some fun little hints.
We'll try to figure it out.
They at a conference saw our fabric and reached out, and it's been about a year of getting to know their team, and they have identified this waste stream that we're going to hopefully get to tap into and use. And they are now granting funding to further our research and development, and essentially a trial to get to that pilot
awesome
stage, which is really, really exciting. Huge opportunity. And it's really encouraging to get to know this team. I think they're really interested in innovation and sustainability. And it's definitely been encouraging to see that they're interested in this kind of work, because it's not a large company. So, I mean, in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, I'll be able to say who. But yeah.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. But yeah, in terms of roadmap, I mean, it is really, I think we can always plan, but I think you sometimes just don't know what opportunities will present itself, like this one. But there are also a ton of opportunities that didn't end up being a big, deal or a big opportunity. So I think you have to be nimble, but also plan and kind of manage your roadmap simultaneously.
Yeah.
So,
70 things at once. Can you do it? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's time for my favorite question that I ask everyone. And that is to switch roles here. And as an engineer, you probably did a lot of design projects in school. So I'm wondering if you were a design educator and you had the chance to teach a project or class, knowing what you know in climate, what would you assign the students to work on?
I would assign essentially my project, I think. I would assign, think of how to recycle a waste product. So whether it be a plastic or, something organic or whatever it is, how do you recycle something into a new product that can actually be used by a consumer? Because as I've now mentioned a few times, there are so many steps to think about. And I think as a student, getting to work through each of those steps is such a great thought exercise. How do you retrieve the material? Who's getting the material? How is it being cleaned or processed? Or how is it then being turned into a new product? And then how is it getting to the customer? I mean, that's a simplified way of looking at it, but I think it is such a great exercise. And as you mentioned with, thinking about okay, where does paper come from with your class? That sometimes people just aren't thinking of it and what's actually going on and how many steps there are. So I would assign a version of this project essentially.
Yeah. And I think there's another really important thing about your project, and that same with paper, right? That red cup is ubiquitous everywhere, right? And sometimes we just don't notice it, right? Just like with paper, because we're just using paper. That's why we don't care about where it comes from. But, where did that red cup come from? Where is it going to be? And that's another, I think, great thing about the new norm is that the students can just look around them and if they pay attention, they can see all these things that are problematic.
Yeah.
Well, you were the perfect guest for this show in terms of,
oh my God, thank you.
In terms of doing what you're doing. And I think it's inspiring to the educators who are listening. It was to me, at least.
Oh, thank you.
In terms of design, right? And then building that out to something bigger with a purpose. So I appreciate that work you're doing, and I'll be an evangelist for the new norm. I'll have to get a shirt though.
Yeah.
So I can at least show that it can be done.
Yeah. No, well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me and letting me kind of share a bit about our story and our journey.
Yeah, no problem. Where can we find you online again, Lauren?
Yeah. So the website is thenewnormfabric.com. And then our social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok, is at the New Norm Fabric. So yeah.
Expect a follow from us.
Okay. Sounds good.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and I really appreciate your time. This podcast is co-produced by Bianca Sandico and me. A big special thanks to Ellen Keith Shaw and Christine Pilot for their gorgeous work on our new branding, Atul Rashik and Mark O'Brien for their continued design help, Brandy Nichols and Michelle Wynn for their strategic guidance and always supporting me on this podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks that review our program, the higher the algorithm pushes up Climify in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all can learn how to become climate designers.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, consider subscribing to Climify. To learn more about Lauren Choi and the new norm, visit thenewnormfabric.com. If If you like this show, remember to help us grow by liking, reviewing, and sharing. And if you're new here, don't forget we have over 100 episodes in the archive. Some might be called Evolve CPG, but it's the same show, so dig in for more goodness. If you consider yourself an impact-driven professional, join me over at impactdriven.community, where we're supporting each other's growth as impact leaders.